At 0642 on September 19th in the year 1944, Sergeant Henry Hartman crouched inside the turret of his M18 Hellcat tank destroyer 3 miles east of the small French village of Arayur and watched heavy morning fog crawl across the open fields ahead as if land itself were trying to hide the danger approaching. He knew the German 5th Panzer Army was somewhere inside that thick white wall, and those troops had been ordered to smash through the American lines and destroy every tank destroyer battalion in their path. Hartman was 24 years old. He had been in combat for 47 days. He had already destroyed 6 German vehicles, and yet every time the fog rolled in like this, he felt the same tight pull in his chest because he understood what his crew was about to face. Intelligence briefings warned that the German 113th Panzer Brigade was advancing with 45 brand new Panther tanks fresh from the factories. Each Panther carried frontal armor more than 5.5 inches thick, and that armor could stop American tank rounds at any distance. Hartman's M18, on the other hand, had only 1 inch of armor at its thickest point. The thickest plate measured 25 millimeters. The floor was barely 5 millimeters thick. A burst from a German machine gun could slice through the thin steel of the hull. The open turret left the crew exposed to grenades, mortars, and sniper fire. Across the 3rd Army tank crews referred to the M18 as the paper coffin, the death trap, the fastest way to die in France, but the Hellcat had one advantage: speed, 55 miles per hour on a good road. Faster than any armored vehicle used in the war. Twice as fast as a Sherman, 3 times faster than a Tiger. American tank destroyer doctrine demanded mobility instead of armor. Move fast, hit hard. Flank the heavier German tanks. Strike the thin side armor and get out before enemy fire arrived. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had landed at Utah Beach 68 days earlier. They were the first unit in Europe equipped with the Hellcat. They were supposed to be the answer to German armored superiority, mobile, lethal, aggressive. In those 68 days, the battalion had knocked out 93 German armored vehicles, but the cost had been severe. 18 Hellcats destroyed, 22 damaged, 41 men killed, 73 wounded. The math was simple and cruel. German tanks, especially Panthers, killed American tank destroyers far more often than they lost to them. A Panther could penetrate an M18 from 2,000 meters. Meanwhile, the Hellcat's 76mm gun could not punch through the frontal armor of a Panther at any range, even if the round was fired from point-blank distance. The only chance for a kill was a shot into the thinner side or rear plates, and reaching those positions usually meant driving straight into danger. Hartman commanded a crew of 5. He had a driver, an assistant driver, a gunner, a loader, and himself as commander. All of them knew how short life could be in a machine with armor this thin. 3rd Army records estimated that 40% of tank destroyer crews became casualties within 90 days of landing in France. The 704th was already past that mark. Company C had lost 6 Hellcats in the past 3 weeks alone. 19 men killed, 8 wounded. The company had started with 12 tank destroyers. They now had 10. Headquarters kept promising replacement vehicles, but none had arrived. Every dawn brought new casualty lists. Every afternoon brought new orders pushing them forward. German crews were fully aware that the American tank destroyers were vulnerable. Panther commanders were trained to target M18 vehicles first. Kill the fast ones, then deal with the slower Shermans. German tank crews used cruel nicknames for the Hellcat, calling it the Tin Can or the Toy Tank. As Hartman stared into the fog, he wondered if the next few minutes would prove those nicknames right. The fog kept growing thicker until the world beyond 30 feet vanished. The radio crackled with static before Lieutenant Edwin Leeper spoke. German armor reported ahead. Panthers moving toward Richicourt late. Company C ordered forward. Hartman's platoon would lead the advance. 4 Hellcats against 45 Panthers hidden in a wall of fog. Hartman tightened the strap on his headset, breathed once, and gave a small nod to his driver. At 0658, the M18 rumbled forward and the 9-cylinder Continental engine roared to life. The same engine used in the Sherman, but pushing half the weight. The The Hellcat surged ahead with a speed no other tracked vehicle could match. Leaper's platoon moved in formation. 4 vehicles keeping about 20 meters apart, though in this fog, Hartmann could barely see the faint shadow of the tank destroyer ahead of him. The narrow road guided them northeast toward Richort-Late, where German armor was believed to be massing for a major counterattack, aimed at pushing the Third Army back across the Moselle River. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion was temporarily attached to the 4th Armored Division, which was spearheading General Patton's drive into Germany. They had already crossed the Moselle 2 weeks earlier. They had liberated Lunéville, they were threatening the city of Nancy, and now the Germans were counterattacking with 2 fresh panzer brigades, the 111th and the 113th. These 2 brigades carried a combined total of 90 Panthers, all recently produced, all deadly. The Panther weighed 45 tons. It had a long-barreled 75mm gun capable of destroying a Sherman at 3,000 meters. Its armor could stop nearly anything the Americans fired. Many American crews feared the Panther more than the Tiger because the Panther was far more common and its gun terrifyingly accurate. The Hellcat, by comparison, weighed 19 tons. It had an open turret and very thin armor, but its 76mm gun and extreme speed made it dangerous in skilled hands. The fog, however, changed everything. Tank destroyer doctrine relied on ambush positions and long firing lines. In this weather, the crew would be lucky to see a Panther at 30 feet. At that range, even a machine gun burst could turn their paper armor into shrapnel. The platoon reached a crossroads at 0712 and slowed to 15 miles per hour. Hartmann checked his ammunition. 45 rounds including armor-piercing shells that could only penetrate German armor from the sides or rear. The radio hissed again. Contact front. Range unknown. Leaper ordered all vehicles to hold position. Then he added 2 words that made every man in Hartmann's crew tighten their grip on their equipment. Prepare to engage. The fog clung to the fields like a shroud as Hartmann and the rest of the platoon waited at the crossroads, their engines idling softly in the still morning air, while the enemy armored force continued its advance somewhere ahead, hidden inside that thick wall of mist. The German attack force consisted of 90 Panthers in total between the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades. These tanks were new from the factory. Their crews had received only a few days of rushed training, yet the machines themselves required no lengthy experience to be deadly. The Panther weighed 45 tons of steel engineered into sloped armor that could deflect incoming rounds with ease. Its long-barreled 75mm gun had tremendous velocity and could destroy a Sherman tank from 3,000 meters. Its maximum road speed was 29 miles per hour, and its operational range was roughly 125 miles. American tankers respected the Tiger yet feared the Panther more because it appeared in far greater numbers and carried a gun powerful enough to tear through almost anything they fielded. The M18 Hellcat, however, existed in a different category. It weighed barely 19 tons and carried an open turret that left the crew exposed to the elements and to enemy fire. It used a 76mm gun that lacked the armor-piercing strength to penetrate a Panther frontally at any range. But the M18 could move at 55 miles per hour, and this speed was its greatest advantage. Tank destroyer doctrine demanded mobility, engage from the flank, strike from concealment, fire and move. Never exchange blows in a static duel. That doctrine made sense under normal battlefield conditions, but the fog erased the long sightlines the M18 needed. At such short distances, even the weakest German machine guns posed a lethal threat. The platoon pushed forward slowly until they reached a point where visibility shrank to less than 30 feet. Hartmann reviewed the ammunition once again. He carried a mix of high-explosive rounds for softer targets and armor-piercing rounds that used the M62 shell. The M62 had solid shot construction and no explosive filler, which made it capable of penetrating about 88 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters under ideal circumstances. That performance meant nothing against the Panther's frontal plates. But the sides and rear were vulnerable if the Hellcat could reach a proper angle. Every crew in the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion knew the reality. Their only hope was to outmaneuver the heavier enemy tanks. The radio hissed once again, and Lieutenant Leeper's voice came through steady and calm. Contact front, German armor, range uncertain. All vehicles prepare to fire. Hartmann shifted his weight and stared into the fog. Somewhere ahead of him, massive armored shapes were moving closer. At 0719, a faint outline materialized. A long barrel emerged first, breaking through the haze, a Panther. It crept forward slowly, its engine rumbling with a low, steady growl as the German crew scanned the fog for threats they could not see. The Panther commander stood in his cupola searching, but unaware that 4 American tank destroyers were waiting less than 30 feet away. Leeper raised his hand signaling positions without using the radio. The 4 M18s spread out. Their spacing widened from 20 meters to 40 meters. Drivers maneuvered carefully, avoiding collision in the blinding fog. Hartmann's driver steered left about 10 meters, then halted. Inside the turret, the gunner traversed slowly, following Hartmann's commands, while the loader lifted an armor-piercing round and locked it into the breech. The German tank continued moving forward at a steady pace, closing the distance with every second. Its commander remained exposed, yet saw nothing. Leeper fired first. The sharp blast of the 76mm gun tore through the fog. The round struck the Panther precisely at a right angle on its side armor. The sloped plate offered no protection at that angle. The shell punched through. Smoke poured from the engine compartment. The tank jerked violently before grinding to a halt. The German crew abandoned the burning machine, scrambling into the mist. 5 seconds later, another Panther rolled into view following the same path. The second tank crew had not noticed the destruction of the lead vehicle. The fog muffled the sounds. Hartmann's gunner fired. The round struck low, damaging the track assembly. The Panther stopped. The turret began rotating slowly as the German crew searched for the unseen threat. Hartmann's loader was quick. He slammed another round into the breech. The gunner fired again. This time the shell struck the turret ring and jammed the rotating mechanism. The German crew bailed out. 2 Panthers down in only a couple of minutes. Not a single American crew member injured. Then the wind shifted slightly from the east and pushed the fog just enough to reveal a terrifying sight. Dozens of Panthers spread across the field beyond. The 113th Panzer Brigade was advancing in a long formation, driving toward Richelieu. Their crews had almost no visibility. They had no reconnaissance support. They were unaware that the American tank destroyers were already set up for an ambush. Leeper seized the opportunity. He ordered his platoon to open fire. The 4 M18s continued engaging from different angles, firing rapidly and repositioning after each shot. The German tanks struggled to determine the origin of the deadly fire. They turned their turrets blindly. Some fired high explosive shells into open fields. Others launched armor-piercing rounds that vanished into the bank of fog. Not a single German shot hit the American tank destroyers. Hartmann's crew worked with relentless speed. The loader cycled rounds in about 8 seconds. The gunner found new targets by following faint outlines and engine sounds. At these ranges between 30 and 60 feet, every shot that struck a side or rear plate penetrated cleanly. By 07:24, Leeper's platoon had destroyed 15 German tanks. Nearly 5 minutes of chaotic close-range fighting. 3 American vehicles had been knocked out, but not by German shells. 1 fell victim to mechanical failure, and 2 were mistakenly struck by friendly artillery in the confusion. Hartmann's Hellcat remained operational. Then the radio came alive again. Company C was moving up. Captain Tom Evans was bringing 2 more platoons for support. 8 additional M18s. The Germans were about to face nearly the entire company. Hartmann scanned the fog and saw 6 more Panthers approaching directly toward his position. 6 against 1, only 23 rounds left, 0 visibility beyond 30 feet. Hartmann made a choice, attack. The Hellcat surged forward at 30 miles per hour, cutting through the fog as the 6 Panthers advanced in single file about 50 feet apart. The lead Panther appeared first at 70 feet. Hartmann's gunner fired. The round struck the side armor just behind the turret. Smoke erupted as the crew bailed out, unaware of where the shot had come from. The next Panther continued forward oblivious. Hartmann's driver shifted position 20 feet to the right. The second Panther emerged. The gunner fired again. The shell struck the running gear and destroyed the track. The turret slowly turned, too late. Another round was ready. The next shot jammed the turret ring. The German crew fled. This was only the beginning, and Hartmann knew it. The battle was about to grow even more intense. The second Panther crew vanished into the fog, leaving behind a crippled tank as Hartmann prepared for the next target. But before he could give the order, the fog shifted again, allowing him to see the horrifying scale of what lay ahead. And in that moment he realized they were not facing a small group of German armor, but an entire armored thrust pushing directly toward them. The 113th Panzer Brigade stretched across the fields in a loose formation with tank after tank, emerging through the mist like steel giants, marching in silence and confusion. The Germans had no idea that American tank destroyers had already taken a firing position right in their path. Leeper's platoon acted with practiced precision. The 4 Hellcats fired in alternating rhythm, each shot followed by immediate relocation. The German crews were blind. The fog distorted sound and sight so thoroughly that the Panthers could not identify the direction of incoming fire. The first bursts from the Hellcats tore through the thin side armor of the Panthers, causing fuel lines to ignite and ammunition to detonate. Fireballs rose briefly, then vanished into the fog. The German tanks attempted to respond, but their shots streaked into empty air. High explosive shells detonated harmlessly in distant fields. Armor-piercing rounds hissed away into the haze, striking nothing. Not one of the German gunners found a target. Hartmann's Hellcat fired repeatedly. The loader moved like a machine, retrieving shells and locking them into the breech every 8 seconds, while the gunner worked the traverse wheel with steady hands. The range varied between 30 feet and 60 feet, and at such close distance every shot found its mark. The armor-piercing rounds penetrated side plates. Some hit the rear engine compartments, causing catastrophic failures. Others struck running gear, disabling the Panthers completely. Within a few short minutes, 15 German tanks were destroyed. It was a devastating blow, and yet the Germans kept coming. At 0724, the first phase of the engagement ended. 3 American vehicles from the platoon were no longer operational, but not due to German fire. One had broken down under the intense strain of maneuvering, and 2 were struck by stray American artillery rounds during the chaos. Hartmann's Hellcat remained functional, and his crew remained determined. The radio crackled again as Captain Tom Evans announced that he was bringing 2 more platoons into the fight. 8 additional Hellcats were closing in. The Germans had no idea they were walking into a trap that now included almost all of Company C. Hartmann scanned the fog-filled world around him and spotted 6 more Panthers approaching in single-file formation, their silhouettes barely visible but moving in perfect alignment. 6 heavily armored machines slowly pushing forward, unaware that a single American tank destroyer had already taken down 2 of their comrades. Hartmann knew hesitation would be fatal. He ordered his driver to advance, and the Hellcat surged forward with remarkable speed. At 30 miles per hour, the M18 cut a narrow path through the fog. The 6 Panthers continued their advance, unaware that death was only yards away. The first Panther appeared at roughly 70 feet. The gunner fired instantly. The round smashed through the side armor just behind the turret. The German crew reacted to the sudden violent shudder of their tank as smoke poured out, but they did not linger. They leapt from the vehicle and disappeared into the haze. The next Panther continued its advance, oblivious to what had happened ahead. Hartmann's driver shifted position 20 feet to the right, giving the gunner a new angle. The second Panther emerged through the fog. The Hellcat fired. The shells struck low, destroying the track and halting the tank. The German turret began to rotate, slowly seeking a threat it could not see. Hartmann's loader shoved another round into the breach. The gunner fired again. This time the shell hit the turret ring and locked the heavy German turret in place. The enemy crew abandoned their useless machine and faded into the mist. 2 Panthers down, 4 remained. Hartmann felt the weight of the moment building. There was no room for error. The fog served both sides, but the Americans had learned how to use it as a weapon. The Hellcat advanced another 40 feet, then 10 feet left, finding a position behind a low stone wall that provided just enough cover to distort its silhouette. The 3rd Panther rumbled past the wall less than 20 feet away. The German crew never noticed the American vehicle sitting only yards from its flank. Hartmann's gunner held his breath waiting for the perfect shot. When the Panther passed fully into view, he fired. The round penetrated the rear armor, which was only 18 millimeters thick. The German ammunition cooked off immediately. Flames shot out from the engine compartment. The tank burst apart. 3 Panthers destroyed. 3 left. The 4th Panther commander finally sensed something was wrong. The radio traffic from the German side had become frantic. Tank crews were reporting explosions and lost vehicles with no clear idea of what was attacking them. The commander halted his Panther and began rotating his turret, carefully searching for threats. Hartmann's driver threw the Hellcat into motion again. They circled right closing distance from a different angle. When the Panther presented its vulnerable side armor, the gunner fired. The round penetrated. Fire erupted inside the tank. 4 Panthers down, 2 remained. The Germans grew desperate. The final 2 Panthers reversed quickly, attempting to retreat as per German armored doctrine, which instructed immediate withdrawal if ambushed. But reversing blindly in fog was dangerous. The 5th Panther backed into a drainage ditch and became stuck its treads, spinning helplessly as the crew tried to force the massive machine free. Hartmann's gunner fired. The armor-piercing round struck the side and ruptured the fuel tank. Flames engulfed the Panther. 1 remained. The last German tank retreated rapidly, moving backward through the fog. Hartmann's driver accelerated. The Hellcat hit 35 miles per hour, closing the gap despite the uneven terrain. The Panther came into view again at 60 feet, still reversing blindly. The German commander stood in the open cupola, trying to guide the tank, but he could not see the danger behind him. Hartmann's gunner fired. The round struck the rear armor and tore through the engine compartment. The Panther jerked to a stop. The crew abandoned it and fled on foot. 6 Panthers destroyed in only 4 minutes of brutal close quarter combat. Hartmann's Hellcat had fired 23 rounds and still carried 17. The fog remained thick, and somewhere ahead dozens more German tanks were still advancing across the fields. Hartmann steadied himself, knowing that the next phase of battle would arrive soon, and it would be even more deadly. The last Panther disappeared into the fog, leaving behind a trail of burning wrecks and shaken German crews, who now understood far too late that they had wandered into the killing ground of a unit that thrived on speed, skill, and surprise. Hartmann steadied his breathing as the echoes of the final shot faded and the metal shell casings clattered around his feet inside the turret. 6 Panthers destroyed in only a few minutes, yet the battle was far from over. The air still trembled with the rumbling engines of dozens more German tanks pushing forward through the thick mist, and every man in Hartmann's crew felt the weight of what was coming next. Captain Tom Evans arrived with the rest of Company C at 0732, bringing 8 additional Hellcats, which boosted their total fighting force to 12 tank destroyers. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing a grim and awe-inspiring sight spread across the open 300-meter field ahead. 21 Panthers burned with thick columns of smoke rising into the sky, twisting upward like black pillars against the dying fog. German soldiers scattered around the wrecks, some wounded, some confused, some fleeing east toward their own lines. The 113th Panzer Brigade had driven straight into an ambush and lost nearly half a company of Panthers in less than 15 minutes, but the German armored force was still intact enough to continue the fight. 24 Panthers remained operational, and these surviving tanks spread out, now learning from the disaster of the morning. Instead of charging forward in a blind column, They maneuvered into a wider formation, attempting to flank Company C's left and right edges. Captain Evans recognized the shift immediately. He ordered his 12 tank destroyers into a defensive arc, stretching 400 meters wide. Each Hellcat received a designated kill zone with overlapping fields of fire, so that no Panther could advance without exposing its vulnerable sides to at least 2 American guns. But the advantage of the fog was fading. By 0800 visibility had improved to nearly 100 feet, and every additional minute brought more clarity to the battlefield. As the fog dissolved, the Panther's main strength returned. At 300 meters, a Panther could destroy an M18 from any angle. The Hellcat's 1-inch armor might as well have been paper. The battle would soon shift from chaotic close range fighting to a long-range duel where German armor dominated. Still, Company C prepared for the next assault. The German armored groups formed 3 distinct attack lines, 8 Panthers in the center and 8 on each flank. At 0748, the 113th Panzer Brigade launched its counterattack. The Panthers rolled forward in a controlled pace, their engines vibrating the ground beneath them. Company C opened fire first. 4 M18s in the center released their opening volley at 250 meters. Armor-piercing rounds screamed across the field. 2 Panthers erupted into fireballs as their ammunition exploded. 3 more were crippled when rounds tore through running gear and breached engine compartments. The German formation came under heavy pressure, but their crews responded instantly. 45 German guns opened fire at once, sending a storm of high-velocity shells toward the thinly armored American tank destroyers. Explosions shook the battlefield as earth, metal, and debris lifted into the air. Many of the German shots sailed high because the Hellcats were hull down with only their turrets exposed above the ridge. Still, not all shots missed. 1 M18 took a direct hit. Its turret blew apart and the crew died instantly. Another Hellcat was struck in its tracks, leaving it immobilized. The crew bailed out before the Germans could land a second shot. 7 American tank destroyers remained in the fight. Captain Evans ordered an immediate withdrawal. Phase 1 complete. The Hellcats reversed down the ridge in perfect synchronization, disappearing from the Panthers' line of sight. In less than 90 seconds, all 7 M18s had relocated to a second ridge, 400 meters west. There they set up new hull-down firing positions, ready for the next German push. The Panthers advanced with caution, aware now that the Americans were executing textbook tank destroyer doctrine. The German commanders adjusted their formation. They split into bound movements with 1/3 of the tanks providing overwatch while the others advanced. This method was slower but far safer. Still, Company C had prepared this exact trap. At 13:45, the German tanks reached the second ridgeline. The 7 Hellcats opened fire at 300 meters. The first volley destroyed 5 Panthers. 2 others were mobility kills. Flames and smoke rose once again. German gunners answered with concentrated volleys. 2 more Hellcats took direct hits. 1 was destroyed outright. Another lost its track and could not continue. 5 American tank destroyers remained. The Germans still had 35 operational Panthers. Evans knew they could not hold the ridge indefinitely. He ordered another tactical withdrawal. The remaining Hellcats reversed once more, falling back toward Ericourt, a village that offered something open field battle did not: cover. The terrain shifted from fields to stone buildings, narrow streets, and tight alleys. In that environment, the Panther could not maneuver freely. Its heavy armor and powerful gun mattered less when forced into choke points. The Hellcat's speed advantage was diminished, but the German ability to use distance and superior armor was also weakened. Urban combat would level the playing field. Hartmann's crew prepared for this next phase. They had fired 11 rounds since the earlier ambush and confirmed 3 additional Panther kills. 2 more were assists. 14 rounds remained in the ammunition rack. The gunner flexed his hands, trying to shake the ache from the recoil. The loader wiped sweat from his face and shoulders sore from the non-stop motion. The driver clenched the controls, feeling the cramped weight of the narrow French streets ahead. At 14:30, the German attack reached the outskirts of Aricourt. 35 Panthers pressed forward, determined to crush the small group of 5 remaining Hellcats before reinforcements from Company A could arrive. The odds were 7-1. Yet Evans knew the Germans would now be forced into predictable routes. Narrow roads created perfect kill zones. Stone walls offered concealment and solid firing positions. The Hellcats fanned out and chose prime ambush locations. Hartmann's tank destroyer settled into an alley that offered a clean 90-degree angle on the main road. At 14:42, 8 Panthers rolled down Rue d'Onion, where they were being watched by American gunners only a few feet away. Hartmann held his fire until the 4th Panther appeared. Then he gave the order. The gunner fired an armor-piercing round that smashed into the side armor at 200 feet. The Panther erupted. Flames filled the narrow street. The burning wreck blocked the path, trapping the 3 tanks behind it. Company C struck again and again, destroying 6 Panthers within minutes. They lost 1 more M18 in the process, but the ambush had worked flawlessly. 4 Hellcats remained, and they had just reshaped the battlefield once more as the sounds of German retreat filled the air. The destruction inside the narrow streets of Aricourt sent shockwaves through the German formation as 6 Panthers burned in the confined roadway, while shattered masonry and twisted metal littered the path the remaining tanks had hoped to push through. The German crews reversed in disarray and pulled back from the choking flames, leaving the shattered section of Rue d'Onion behind them. For a brief moment, the surviving Hellcat crews caught their breath. Only 4 M18s remained operational, and the sound of battle still thundered across the outskirts of the village because dozens of Panthers were still pushing from the east. The 111th Panzer Brigade had started the day with 45 tanks. 16 of those had already been destroyed in the brutal fighting around the town, and 29 remained capable of continuing the assault. Company C had lost 6 M18s since dawn, and 8 others were either destroyed or disabled. Only 4 Hellcats remained in action. Even with those losses, the Americans had inflicted staggering damage. 49 Panthers had been destroyed in a single day by the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, but the battle was not finished. Word spread quickly through American lines as runners and radio operators carried news of what Hartmann and the other crews had accomplished. Captain Tom Evans repositioned the remaining Hellcats to cover the escape routes out of Aricourt, while the last Panthers of the 111th Brigade gathered themselves for another attempt at breaking through the American lines. While the Germans regrouped, the American commanders evaluated the condition of their dwindling force. 1 M18 had cracked hull plates from earlier impacts, and its engine sputtered with every movement. Another had lost part of its suspension and barely rolled forward. Only Hartmann's Hellcat and 1 other remained fully functional. Yet the surviving crews stood firm because they understood what was at stake. If the German tanks pushed through Aricourt unopposed, they would break into the open country beyond and threaten the entire flank of the Third Army advance. While the Americans repositioned, the Germans pulled back to reorganize. The lack of fog in the afternoon transformed the battlefield again. Visibility widened to several hundred meters, giving the Panthers a clear advantage. At 300 meters, the Panther's 75mm gun could punch through the thin Hellcat armor from any angle. Still, the Americans kept up their aggressive tactics. They used hit-and-run movement. They stayed hidden behind stone buildings and hedgerows. They forced the Germans into predictable funnels whenever possible. Company C and the attached companies had spent months training in ambush drills and withdrawal patterns. That training paid off as the Battle of Aricourt continued to shift through different landscapes. By 0800 hours 21, Panthers were burning in the fields near Richet-Late, and 14 more lay crippled across the ridges west of the village. As the day progressed, the Germans attempted to regroup for a final push. They brought the remaining 29 Panthers in line while the Americans consolidated their defensive positions. The Americans still managed to destroy several more tanks during the German withdrawal phase. 2 Panthers were blown apart during the retreat as M18 gunners tracked them at 400 and then 500 meters. Ammo smoke drifted through the trees and ruined buildings as Company C held their position until 08:15 when the main firing ceased. By that time, 33 German tanks had been destroyed, 14 had escaped. Company C had lost 3 M18s to direct fire and 1 to mechanical failure. 7 Americans were killed and 11 wounded. Sergeant Henry Hartman, who had been at the center of the early morning ambush, had personally destroyed 6 Panthers in only 4 minutes during the first phase of the battle. His gunner had achieved a hit rate of nearly 78%, something unheard of in normal tank combat, where hit rates often fell below 30%. The battalion reported their success to headquarters at 0900. The numbers were so shocking that Third Army intelligence demanded proof. Many officers doubted the claim. They could not imagine lightly armored tank destroyers scoring such a decisive victory against the most feared German tank on the Western Front. Captain Evans provided photographs, ammunition counts, and testimonies from the crews who had survived the fight. These accounts described how the fog had given the Americans an advantage that nullified the Panther long-range superiority. The Germans could not see the Hellcats and therefore could not target them accurately. The Americans maneuvered constantly using the fog as armor and speed as protection. The M18 was built for such tactics, but few American commanders had ever used tank destroyers in the way they were originally designed. Many employed them like tanks, sending them into frontal assaults where their thin armor guaranteed disaster. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had understood the doctrine from its earliest days. They trained for mobility. They practiced ambush tactics at full speed. They drilled non-stop until their loader crews could cycle around in 7 seconds. Their drivers could reposition while under fire. Their gunners could engage outline targets in low visibility. That training turned a vehicle, nicknamed the Paper Coffin, into an engine of destruction. Not one German crew in the 113th Brigade had expected to face tank destroyers that moved and fought with such precision. The German losses at Rishya Late exposed another uncomfortable truth. The Panther units that launched the attack were filled with inexperienced crews. Many had fewer than 10 days of training. They had not practiced fighting in fog. They did not maintain proper spacing. They did not send reconnaissance ahead of the armored columns. They simply drove into the unknown, relying on the power of their tanks rather than the experience of their men. Every mistake they made turned into a fatal weakness. By midday, intelligence reported that reinforcements from the 111th Panzer Brigade were pushing west, carrying another 45 Panthers toward Araucourt. These tanks were expected to reach the outskirts of the village by 1400 hours. Company C had only 9 operational M18s left, and they knew another devastating fight waited just ahead. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had proven something vital that morning. The M18 Hellcat could defeat Panthers not by overpowering their armor, but by using mobility and aggressive tactical positioning. Velocity, not armor, had won the morning battle, and the same principle would be tested brutally once again as the 111th Panzer Brigade closed in for the next engagement. The astonishing victory that Company C achieved in the morning battle owed itself to one powerful invisible ally that no man could control and no machine could duplicate: fog. The thick white curtain that had blanketed the fields around Rishya-Leppe had turned German strength into weakness and American vulnerability into advantage. At distances of only 30 feet, the Panther gunners could not see the Hellcats. They could not track muzzle flashes. They could not follow sound or movement with any precision. The Americans used the fog the way other armies used steel plating. They treated it like armor. With each shot, they repositioned before the Germans could respond. And although the Panthers possessed superior protection firepower and reached none of those advantages mattered in a fight where visibility collapsed into a narrow tunnel of shifting gray, Tank destroyer doctrine had been built around the concept of mobility and rapid maneuver. Strike, relocate, strike again, never remain still long enough for enemy guns to find you. Yet few American commanders across Europe used their M18 units this way. Many treated them as if they were tanks and sent them into frontal engagements where their thin armor guaranteed disaster. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had trained relentlessly for the opposite approach. They learned to fight exactly as the doctrine demanded. They practiced rapid fire drills until their loaders could cycle rounds in 7 seconds. They rehearsed emergency withdrawal until their drivers could reverse at full speed without hesitation. They drilled their gunners to identify targets from silhouettes, shapes, and noise rather than clear sightlines. That level of discipline allowed them to survive engagements that should have ended in total destruction. Meanwhile, the German units they faced lacked similar preparation. The 113th Panzer Brigade had been formed quickly, and most of its crews had fewer than 10 days in their Panthers. They had not learned how to fight in low visibility. They did not maintain proper spacing or reconnaissance. They drove in column formation through unfamiliar terrain at the worst possible time. Every mistake they made became an opening for the Americans, but even the best training could not overcome the weight of numbers. The morning battle had been won by a combination of skill, fog, and daring, but the approaching threat was far larger. Intelligence reported that the 111th Panzer Brigade was advancing from 6 miles east, carrying 45 fresh Panthers toward Arcourt. Company C had only 9 operational Hellcats left. Every surviving crew understood what these numbers meant. They were about to face a second armored assault even stronger than the first, and this time the fog was lifting. Reinforcements from Company, 2 platoons with 8 additional Hellcats were promised, but they would not reach the battlefield until 1600 hours. Too late to influence the opening stages of the fight. Captain Evans made his decision without hesitation. Company C would delay the German advance no matter the cost. They would establish ambush positions between Racher-Leppet and Arcourt using every ridge tree line and village street to slow the German momentum. The same tactics that had saved them in the morning would have to be used again even though the circumstances were far worse. Hartmann and his crew prepared calmly. 17 rounds remained, armor-piercing and high explosive. Enough for another engagement, but not enough for prolonged combat. The driver checked the engine. The oil pressure gauge showed normal. The fuel level stood at 3/4. Track tension was good. The gunner cleaned the inside of the barrel and reset the sights. The loader arranged the ammunition so his hands could move without hesitation. No man spoke, but every man felt the same sharp weight in his chest. At 11:30, reconnaissance scouts reported German movement. The Panthers were no longer advancing in blind columns. The 111th Brigade had learned from the morning defeat. They were now spread out. They used infantry screens and scouts. They maintained spacing and approached Arcourt with caution. More importantly, the fog had almost vanished. By noon, visibility extended to 300 meters, and at that distance, the Panther gun became a killing instrument. Front armor on German tanks remained untouchable to the American 76mm rounds. Only the sides and rear offered a chance, and those opportunities would be rare in such open conditions. Still, Company C deployed along a ridge west of Arcourt. 9 Hellcats spread across 800 meters. They dug into hull-down positions so that only their turrets were visible above the crest. Captain Evans gave each crew a designated kill zone and a pre-planned withdrawal route. The moment they fired, they were to reverse down the slope, relocate to the next ridge and fire again. It was a deadly dance, but it was the only way they could fight 35 tons of German steel with 19 tons of American aluminum and thin plating. Hartmann's Hellcat covered the southern approach. His field of fire stretched from open farmland into the tree line, where the Germans were expected to appear. At 400 meters, the Panther gun was frighteningly accurate, and Hartmann knew that a single hit anywhere on the Hellcat would tear through the thin armor and turn the interior into a furnace of shrapnel and flame. Yet he also knew this battle depended on his crew. They had proven their skill earlier and would now test themselves again under far harsher conditions. At 13:20, the 111th Panzer Brigade launched its attack. The sound of 45 engines rumbled across the land like distant thunder. 3 battle groups advanced together, 15 tanks each. They moved in line formation, with 200 meters between each group, forming a broad armored wall across the landscape. The fogless afternoon revealed their steel forms in perfect clarity, and the Hellcat crews watched in silence as the shadow of the German armor fell across the ridge. Evans held his fire. The Panthers moved closer. 400 meters, 350, 300. At 250 meters he gave the order, fire. 9 Hellcats unleashed their opening volley. The 9 Hellcats fired as one, and the ridge exploded with the deafening roar of American 76mm guns. Their armor-piercing rounds streaked across the clear afternoon air and slammed into the advancing German line. 6 Panthers shuddered under the impact. 3 erupted into towering flames as their ammunition ignited, and 3 more lurched to a halt with shattered running gear and smoking engine decks. The German assault stalled instantly, but the Panthers did not hesitate. In the space of a single breath, 45 German guns answered with a furious storm of high-explosive and armor-piercing fire. The ground shook beneath the Hellcats as shells detonated along the ridgeline, sending fountains of dirt and shattered stone into the sky. Even with hull-down positions, the M18s were dangerously exposed. Their thin armor offered no protection against the Panther main gun. Most German shots flew high due to the uphill angle of fire, but not all missed. One M18 took a direct hit and vanished in a fireball. Its turret lifted off the hull in a burst of flame and smoke. The crew died before they even knew what had struck them. Another Hellcat lost its track as a glancing round tore through the suspension. The crew bailed out and rolled down the slope while German shells continued to hammer the ridge. Only 7 American tank destroyers remained. Captain Evans ordered immediate withdrawal, Phase 1 complete. The surviving Hellcats reversed down the backside of the ridge, disappearing from German view in a perfectly synchronized retreat. They raced west toward the next defensive line, already prepared in advance. The entire movement took only 90 seconds. When the Panthers crested the ridge ready to finish the kill, their guns found nothing but empty ground. The Germans advanced warily, adopting a methodical bounding maneuver. One group moved cautiously, while 2 provided overwatch. It was the correct response to a mobile ambush, and it revealed that the 111th Panzer Brigade possessed far better training than the morning force. At 13:45, the Panthers approached the second ridge. Company C waited in silence. The moment the lead German tanks entered the kill zone, 7 M18s opened fire again. Their volley tore into the German line, and 5 Panthers burst into flames, while 2 more screeched to a halt, crippled by sheared tracks and smoking transmissions. The German reply was swift and brutal. Concentrated fire ripped toward the American positions. 1 Hellcat shattered under a direct hit, and another was disabled when a shell tore into its drive system. That left only 5 operational American vehicles against 35 German tanks still pushing the assault. Captain Evans once again ordered the withdrawal. The 5 surviving M18s fell back to their 3rd prepared position near the outskirts of Arikour. The battlefield now shifted from rolling farmland to tight urban streets, where high walls, narrow alleys, and stone buildings created new angles of engagement. Urban terrain stole the Panther advantage. The heavy German tanks could not maneuver freely. Their long guns struggled to swing inside confined spaces. Their wide hulls could not pivot easily. Meanwhile, the Hellcats lost their open field speed advantage, but gained concealment and ambush opportunities. Every street became a potential kill zone. Evans spread his vehicles at key intersections, letting each crew choose a firing position with a clear escape route through alleys or side roads. Hartmann's Hellcat took position behind a stone wall in a narrow alley that opened into Rue Donny. From there, his gunner would have a perfect 90-degree shot at anything moving through the main street. By 1430, the Panthers pushed into the outskirts of the village. 35 tanks entered slowly, wary of the traps they knew must be waiting. The first group of 8 Panthers rolled down Rue Donny, their engines echoing through the tight stone corridors. Hartmann watched them from the shadows, his heart pounding as each massive steel shape rumbled past the opening in the alley. He signaled his crew to hold fire until the moment came. When the 4th Panther appeared at the intersection, Hartmann gave the order, "Fire." The 76mm round smashed through the Panther's side armor at 200 feet. The tank erupted instantly. Flames burst from the hatches and thick black smoke filled the street. The burning wreck toppled sideways, blocking the narrow lane and trapping the 3 Panthers behind it. In seconds, the entire column became a line of steel targets. Company C struck hard. Hellcat guns opened fire from alley's side streets and behind collapsed stone walls. Shell after shell ripped into German armor. Panthers exploded one after another. In the confined streets, the blasts were deafening. The shockwaves bounced between the buildings and rolled across the village like thunder. The German crews were caught in a steel coffin of their own making. They could not escape forward because the burning Panther blocked the way. They could not reverse because enemy fire cut off their retreat. 6 Panthers died in that single ambush, while only 1 Hellcat was lost in return. 4 M18s remained. The remaining German tanks began pulling out of the village in disorganized retreat. 29 Panthers fled east, leaving their burning wrecks behind. The Americans held their ground, exhausted but unbroken. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, the fighting inside Arikour had ended. Yet the day was far from over. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had already destroyed 49 German tanks since dawn. But the German armored divisions expected reinforcements. Intelligence warned that more tanks were moving west. The Americans had inflicted one of the most impressive armored defeats on the Western Front, yet they would still need to fight through the next days before the region was fully secured. Hartmann and his crew remained inside their M18 as the smoke drifted slowly through the streets. Their ears rang from the blasts, their arms burned with fatigue, their clothes were soaked with sweat and dust. But they were alive, and they had once more proven that courage, training, and maneuver could overcome even the strongest armored Germany could produce. The final Panthers of the 111th Panzer Brigade withdrew from the burning streets of Arikour, leaving behind a trail of shattered steel-wrecked treads and smoke that drifted slowly upward into the late afternoon sky. The survivors pulled back to reorganize outside the village, carrying with them the knowledge that they had just been beaten by a force that by every calculation should have fallen in the opening hour of the battle. Company C stood victorious, though reduced to only 4 operational Hellcats, and each vehicle carried scars from the brutal fighting that had raged since dawn. Yet the numbers spoke loudly. The Americans had destroyed 49 Panthers in one day, a feat unmatched on the Western Front at that time. Their losses had been heavy, with 6 M18s destroyed and 14 damaged, but their impact on the battlefield changed the course of the German counterattack at Arikour. General George Patton arrived at Company CS Command Post on September 20th, the morning after the fighting. He came to see for himself the thin-skinned tank destroyers that had crippled 2 German armored brigades in less than 24 hours. Patton walked among the Hellcats, touching the battered steel plates, still streaked with soot and blackened by near misses. He spoke to the crews, including Sergeant Henry Hartmann, and asked him directly how a 1-inch armored vehicle managed to destroy 6 Panthers at point-blank range. Hartmann answered with the same honesty he had given his own men. Fog gave them concealment. Speed gave them the ability to reposition. Training gave them the skill to strike before the Germans could react. Luck filled the spaces where none of those advantages should have been enough. Patton nodded silently, recognizing that victory in war often came from the strange, unstoppable mixture of preparation and unpredictable circumstance. Patton then turned to Captain Tom Evans and awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, describing him as a commander who showed fearless leadership, tactical brilliance and unyielding resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. Evans attempted to share the honor with his crews, but Patton insisted that the medal belonged to the officer who held the line and inspired his men. Still, every soldier present knew the truth. The loaders who fed rounds into hot breeches in 8 seconds. The gunners who found targets in fog thick as cloth. The drivers who maneuvered under fire and wove their vehicles through narrow alleys and chaotic ridgelines. Those men had won the battle through teamwork, not through one man's command. The Battle of Arrocourt continued for 3 more days, stretching from September 19th through September 22nd, as the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion fought against the full weight of the German 5th Panzer Army. German records later confirmed that the Americans destroyed 281 armored vehicles, including Panthers, Panzer IVs, and self-propelled guns. The 704th lost 7 M18s destroyed and 14 damaged. 23 men were killed and 41 wounded. The kill ratio soared above 40-1. Military historians would later call Arrocourt the largest armored battle on the Western Front in 1944. Surpassing even engagements in Normandy and predating the massive clashes of the Ardennes that came later that winter. The outcome shocked German commanders who believed their Panthers were unstoppable in open battle. Instead, they watched 2 elite brigades suffer catastrophic losses at the hands of a battalion whose vehicles were often dismissed as fragile death traps. The Americans won decisively. The 5th Panzer Army withdrew eastward, abandoning its attempt to break the 3rd Army advance, and Patton's armored divisions resumed their push toward the German border. The M18 Hellcat, which had been doubted by so many before the battle, now stood as one of the most effective tank destroyers in Europe. Its thin armor had been compensated for by speed maneuver and the disciplined tactics of crews who understood exactly what their machine could and could not do. Sergeant Hartmann survived the remainder of the war. He fought with the 704th in France, Belgium, and Germany. He crossed the Rhine in March 1945 and reached Czechoslovakia in May. By war end, Hartmann's crew had destroyed 14 German armored vehicles, 6 at Arrocourt and 8 in later engagements. Hartmann never suffered a wound despite his open turret and thin armor. His M18 was struck 3 times, but the damage was minor each time, and the crew repaired the vehicle themselves before returning to the line. When the war ended, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion was deactivated in November 1945. The men went home and tried to rebuild lives that had been shaped and scarred by months of relentless fighting. Hartmann rarely spoke about his wartime experiences. He never claimed to be a hero. When neighbors or co-workers asked about the battles, he downplayed his own role and emphasized instead the discipline of his crew. He said that victory came from 5 men working as one, not from a single act of bravery. The M18 Hellcat remained in American service until 1953. After the war, the United States Army retired the concept of separate tank destroyer battalions, believing that future wars would rely on main battle tanks for anti-armor roles. Yet the legacy of the Hellcat lived on for decades in the design, philosophy of fast maneuver-focused armored vehicles. Company CS performance at Arrocourt proved that hit-and-run tactics, mobility, and speed could defeat heavier armor when used with precision and courage. The critics who once mocked the M18 as a paper coffin were proven wrong by the men who transformed it into one of the deadliest weapons on the Western Front. Today, a memorial stands in Arrocourt honoring the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion and the liberation of the region in September 1944. The stone marker describes how American tank destroyer crews stood against overwhelming odds and shattered German armored spearheads that threatened thousands of civilian lives. The names of towns once swallowed by fear now stand beside words of gratitude carved into the memorial stones. The men of Company C became part of a history that endures not because of fame, but because of what they gave in the moments that mattered most. Their courage, skill, and sacrifice ensured that the story of Arrocourt would not fade into silence. And among these men, few names shine brighter than that of Sergeant Henry Hartmann, the young commander who faced 6 German Panthers in a fog-filled field and destroyed them all with a machine built not for armor, but for speed, will, and unbreakable resolve. If you want more forgotten war stories told with truth, grit, and no filters, subscribe now. Your support keeps these missions alive.